Stan Saylor, Appropriations Chairman for the House. Good morning, Stan. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Gary?
I am well. Getting ready for a July 4th weekend, and obviously celebrating our nation's birthday. And I was looking at a couple things that involved you guys this week, and particularly the signing of the budget yesterday, and also the veto of the voting rights bill. And I wanted to get into both those with you: the election reform bill, I should say, not the voting rights bill, the election reform bill. But I wanted to talk first of all about the budget. And could I ask a favor that politicians never be allowed to use the word invest again? I am so tired of hearing this investment in the future, investment. The governor said yesterday, this is a budget that invests in Pennsylvanians. It's such politispeak. If it is a budget that will help those hit hardest by the pandemic get the support they need, while at the same time making crucial investments in our future by supporting the students and workers who will drive our economy forward in the years to come. Thank you, Captain Obvious. I mean, it really drives me crazy, this idea of investing. And I'm thinking to myself, and this is where I wanted to talk to you this morning, because you're a guy that handles a little bit of this money with being the Appropriations Chairman in the House. And I heard from the Senate Appropriations Chairman this week on reading some articles, but I wanted to get it from you. This idea of, for example, we have $5 billion in COVID funds that are still there from the federal COVID relief package. And we apparently are we're saving that for the future. And then I saw where we have 2.7 or $2.9 billion that we're sitting back for a rainy day fund. And when I hear that, I hear we overtaxed you $2.9 million. We're going to stick it away. If you want to really invest, give it to the people out there on the street and say, you go invest it. We don't do such a good job with investing anyway because we have all the waste, fraud, and abuse and corruption in Harrisburg as it is. So there, I give that to you this morning to play with a little bit. I've just been the devil's advocate for a moment, and I thought, hey, I want to know. I see where people are saying, hey, they're saving in this particular budget. I'm going, we're saving? Okay, all right. I need to ask a guy who knows a little something about money, so that's why I'm coming to you this morning, Stan, for your help, so I won't have to go to counseling for 2 more weeks. So give me a good thought this morning, my friend.
Well, let's talk economics first.
Okay.
Gary, this year our income tax, personal income tax, only grew by 0.6%, which is a very bad number.
Yeah.
Where we got our $2.5 billion mostly came from sales tax. And it came from people going out and using their stimulus checks to buy cars and TVs and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So we were like $900 million. I didn't get June's report yet. We'll get it later today.
Right.
For the end of June. But the money is kind of what I would call is taxes on the federal dollar. And the same thing is with corporations. Many of the corporations paid their profits this year rather than next year because President Biden has scared the daylights out of them by the new proposal of capital gains tax and the new corporate taxes he's proposing. So a lot of them decided to save their expenses for next year and pay higher taxes or pay their taxes this year.
Okay.
By that. So what happens now is next year, because nobody's working, and I say nobody, we have a high unemployment rate here in Pennsylvania because of that additional dollars, we expect that we will be close to possibly a $2 billion deficit next year.
I saw that. Yeah.
And with that, the years following that are just as bad at this point. Now, if we recover very rapidly, which is very possible, if there's not another outbreak of the variant or whatever, and I'm hoping and praying that that's not going to happen, we should be okay. But what we don't want to do is do what Governor Rendell did, and that was spend all the federal dollars and then have no dollars in the future. We had to cut programs, cut education, higher ed in particular, things like that. And that's what we didn't want to do. The Democrats wanted to go out and do all kinds of things, spend all $10 billion that we had, by the way. And that makes no sense when you already know you're going to have a deficit next year. Even if you have a good recovery, we're expected to have a deficit by all economic indicators and by all the different groups.
Yeah, I mean that makes.
So what we did.
Yeah, it makes some sense. And I've read that, and I guess I'm looking at it. I guess I'm looking at it in a vacuum. I'm looking at it. When you have extra money, give it back to people and let them go. Spend it. But I mean, I hear what you're saying, and it makes some sense. And I've thought about that the last couple of days since I kind of made my initial remarks on that. But the other thing about that, like the COVID and $5 billion in COVID relief, it's a federal money, obviously comes in, and I'm thinking, couldn't that be used right now, for example, for a lot of businesses? I know the PPP thing covered a lot of that, and I don't know if it can be used, and that's one of the things I wanted to ask you this morning. shouldn't that be used to help small businesses recover right now, or people who have, lost jobs and so forth? I'm sure some of that is already happening. But if there's $5 billion there, and yet we're still always talking about more programs to get more relief for people, isn't it kind of hard to go out and support another program when you have $5 billion sitting there already in the coffers that hasn't been used yet?
Well, that's one reason I opposed any new programs, and the reason we stashed it away. We've been very clear, I think, as a whole, as the Republicans, is that we do expect that some of that money will be used for that in the fall based upon, well, again, depending that we don't need it for a new variant of the COVID outbreak.
Right.
But we're looking at tax cuts possibly coming, corporate, PIT, so on and so forth. We are looking at those things, but we want to be judicious in that we don't get ahead of ourselves until we know exactly what's going on. I mean, nobody knows what this economy holds.
Right.
And this stimulus money that has come out in these paychecks, it doesn't matter where you go. Restaurants are closing at 9 o'clock at night.
Right.
Businesses are having a tough time because of the stimulus. And so we're just kind of like, okay, where is this going? And I can't forecast because even in Washington, we're waiting to see what they're going to do with the infrastructure bill and what that's going to do. We're going to need matching dollars for that. Where's those investments going to be so that we don't waste the dollars we do have? We are, you're right. It'd be nice to spend those dollars, but we just don't have good indications from Washington on what they're going to do. So we're kind of being a little overly cautious and conservative with what we do.
So the silt hasn't rested on the bottom of the river yet. I mean, it's still kind of filtering down when we look at the way we're working, the number of people who are out of jobs right now, the possibility of this new variant having some effect on our economy again. What's going to happen in terms of what our economy is going to look like going back, because we're seeing increasing numbers of stories about people who are leaving the economy, reevaluating where they're going to be. Of course, the $15 an hour argument about minimum wage is raging out there. A lot of companies have picked that up, but then we also have companies that are saying, oh, guess what? I'm going to go to AI now. I'm going to start having self-checkout in places instead of having people working. And what's that going to do to unemployment and all those things? So I guess all of that kind of swirls together at the end of the story, right?
That's correct. And that's why we invested a lot more money in our trade and technical schools in Pennsylvania this year. We put a lot of dollars in it because we do expect people will be changing careers, and we wanted to make sure the resources in this budget were there for the trade schools. And we've made it clear that we're going to continue to invest in that area for job retraining if need be. But like I said, we're kind of sitting back and saying, okay, what's going to happen with this economy? There are people forecasting a recession because of all this money. So maybe we're being a little overcautious. I mean, and that can be, we can be criticized for that. But the last thing I think we wanted to do was, one, not have money if another outbreak comes to help these businesses. And number two, we wanted to make sure we had money to invest. I hate that word, I know, in whatever needs to be done to get this economy and job creation. Because right now, with Washington and the uncertainties there, it has not given states like Pennsylvania, who are old states who are trying to recover, and with the president shutting down the pipeline, that's affecting our economy here in Pennsylvania and jobs as well. So we're just, I'd say, being overly cautious to what's going to look like this fall and next spring. And we're willing to invest in small businesses, tax cuts, things like that. But we want to make sure before we do it, we're not reversing track and raising taxes.
And he is a state representative for the 94th Legislative District, but he's also the House Appropriations Chair. He is Stan Saylor with us here this morning. Stan, the other part of the whole, what the governor did yesterday, he signed the budget bill, and then he vetoed House Bill 1300. Now, Seth Grove, your colleague from over the 196, has been very, very big on pushing this, and of course he had all kinds of hearings on this. Seth, who is the head of the House State Government Committee, he's a chairman there, authored the Voting Rights Protection Act after a number of hearings. The governor came back yesterday, and he decided to veto that. Now, he said in advance he was going to veto it, but he said, I made it clear I couldn't sign or I wouldn't sign a bill that creates barriers to voting, he said in a tweet about House Bill 1300. He said, but that's exactly what this bill does by, number one, limiting mail ballots, number two, capping early voting, number three, cutting voter registration time. He does not talk about the ID factor in there. And I wanted to get your take this morning on the governor's veto of that. I know it's very political, and yet at the same time, was this politically motivated by Seth and the people that did it and by the Republicans, or was this very simply just trying to get some reform to, what's going on with the way we vote here, especially the state of Pennsylvania, which was such a big topic this last election in 2021?
Seth Grove did an amazing job, very bipartisan. He listened to everybody in the hearings. He had 10 hearings over several months. He put the bill together that basically is a very similar to the law in Florida, which everybody has praised as outstanding, that has election security in it. That's the thing we heard, even from Democrats from Philadelphia. I hear Democrats down there complaining about ballot boxes being stuffed. I don't know what's true down there. When there's primaries down there, well, the Democratic leader doesn't like me and he did this or did that. And this is coming from Democrats. And there are Democrats who support voter ID. Bottom line here is this was a compromise of what the county commissioners wanted, what Democrats wanted, and what Republicans wanted. Mm-hmm. But the radical left wing the governor is catering to when he vetoed this bill.
Right.
There is nothing. I talk to people I have friends that are black, Latinos, Jewish, Muslim, you name it. I have friends of all spectrums out there, and I talk to all of them about this kind of stuff. And, there's nobody today who doesn't have an ID. Almost nobody. Unless you're 100 years old, don't drive, or you're in a nursing home,
right.
You have ID because you can't go to the grocery store, you can't cash a check, you can't use your credit cards. This is the arguments are absurd. But, hey, if you want to make what they want is, in my opinion, to take away the security of elections. And so they want to be able to vote every day. They don't want you to register until your election day so that they can drag people in off the street who may be homeless to vote in areas that, will affect an election. That's absurd. We want to make sure every voter votes that wants it. There's nothing in this bill that suppresses votes. There's nothing in this bill that we even cover the fact that if anybody doesn't have ID, they get free ID.
Right.
So this kind of a thing is where the governor is basically kowtowing down to the radical left, not liberals, but the radical left. And I don't get it. What is best for Pennsylvania? Quit playing politics with these issues. This has nothing to do with January 6th. This bill has nothing to do with the Trump election. This has to do with future elections.
Right.
And to make sure that every Pennsylvanian, whether you're a Democrat, Independent, Republican, whatever, feel that nobody cheated to win.
Well, and I look more at the future like you are with this. It's not so much the past, and I think to myself, is it really a stretch to say, I have to have my ID card after the first time and have it every time in a day and age where, ID theft is something we worry about? I went to get some Claritin D the other day. I had to show my license to get Claritin D at the drugstore. Okay, so that's part of the rules. All right, fine. Well, part of the rules in being responsible in Pennsylvania would be to show your ID when you vote. Is that really that hard? Signature verification, is that really a terrible thing? Again, to show who you are. Instead of, and what we come down to here, I saw in a recent Franklin and Marshall College poll that 74% of those polled support voters having to show an ID card, and 81% are in favor of signature verification. Now, that's more than half. That's more than just a partisan side. And so people are in favor of that. Why we continue to fight this, it looks like we're trying to guard, voting under any circumstances is somehow okay. Well, it's not. It comes with a certain set of responsibilities. Final thoughts on your part.
Well, last year, a judge of elections was indicted in Philadelphia for stuffing the ballot boxes down there over several elections.
I saw that, yeah.
They finally caught him. Look, there are Republicans who can stuff the ballot box. There's Democrats. It's not just one party here. We want to make sure both parties are playing by the rules. And look, you just mentioned it. You can't even see a doctor today or get a prescription filled if you don't have ID.
Right.
So I don't get it, but if you want to cater to one right-wing, left-wing radicals, you're never going to get a compromise to get things done for the people of Pennsylvania. It's about compromise, and that's what that bill was.
Stan Saylor here on WSBA Morning News with Gary Sutton. We take a break. We'll come back.